Welcome to Life Stories. A struggling mother, a lost boy in a snowstorm, and a secret that changed everything. When Emma found young Noah on the side of the road, freezing and alone, she had no idea she was stepping into a dangerous mystery. As powerful enemies closed in, she had to make an impossible choice: run, fight, or find the one man who could protect him. But could Noah's wealthy, estranged father truly save him? Or was the real danger just beginning? Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey, where every story is a lesson in love, courage, and survival. The night was one of those that seemed endless, where the wind howled like a wounded animal and the snow fell so thick it felt as though the entire world had disappeared. The roads were treacherous, barely visible under the relentless storm, and each gust of wind rattled the old sedan that Emma was driving, making her grip the wheel tighter. Her hands were stiff with cold despite the feeble heat struggling from the vents, and her breath fogged up the windshield faster than the defroster could clear it. She was exhausted, having worked a double shift at the small diner on the outskirts of Denver, and all she wanted was to get home, wrap herself in blankets, and let the rest of the world fade away for a few precious hours. But fate had other plans. At first, she thought it was nothing more than a shadow flickering through the swirling snow, a trick of the storm, her tired mind playing games with her. But as she squinted through the frost-covered glass, her stomach tightened. There, stumbling along the side of the road, was a child. A boy, no more than 7 or 8 years old, dressed in nothing but a thin jacket and a backpack that looked too large for his small frame. His steps were uneven, his head bowed against the wind, and something in the way he moved struck a deep chord of fear in Emma's heart. He was alone. Without hesitation, she slammed on the brakes, her tires skidding slightly on the icy road. The car came to a stop, and she barely managed to throw it into park before shoving the door open and stepping into the freezing air. The cold hit her like a wall, stealing her breath. But she didn't stop. She called out, waving her arms, trying to get his attention. He didn't react. If anything, he seemed to slow down, as though his legs were barely capable of carrying him forward. Emma reached him just as he collapsed. She caught his small body in her arms, his weight barely anything at all. His face was pale, his lips an alarming shade of blue, and when she touched his cheek, it was ice cold. Her heart pounded as she wrestled with the door to her car, barely managing to bundle him inside before slamming it shut against the storm. She cranked up the heat and wrapped her scarf around him, rubbing his hands between her own, trying desperately to bring warmth back into his fragile body. "Stay with me, okay? You're going to be all right," she murmured, her voice shaky with adrenaline. The boy didn't answer. He barely moved, except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. As she drove, her hands trembling on the wheel, 1,000 questions raced through her mind. Who was he? Where had he come from? Why was he out in the middle of nowhere during one of the worst snowstorms of the year? There were no houses nearby, no broken-down cars, no sign that he had been with anyone at all. And most terrifying of all, why had no one come looking for him? By the time she reached her tiny house on the edge of town, the storm had not eased. The wind still roared through the trees, and the snow was already piling up against her porch. She struggled to get the boy inside, his body limp in her arms as she laid him carefully on the worn-out couch in her living room. In the dim light, his face looked ghostly, far too still, far too quiet. "All right, kid," she murmured, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead. "Let's get you warmed up." She moved quickly, grabbing blankets and wrapping them tightly around him, kneeling beside him as she listened to the slow, unsteady rhythm of his breathing. His shoes were soaked through, his socks practically frozen to his feet, and the realization sent a sharp pang through her chest. How long had he been out there? How close had he come to never making it out of that storm at all? Her curiosity got the better of her. The backpack he had been clutching was still beside him, too heavy for someone his size. bulging awkwardly at the seams. Against her better judgment, she unzipped it, expecting maybe a few clothes, perhaps a name or some clue as to where he had come from. What she found instead made her stomach drop. Bundles of cash, neatly packed. Crisp bills filled the bag, mixed with a few small items of children's clothing and a crumpled piece of paper. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, revealing a hastily written note. "Take care of him. He's not safe with us anymore." A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Her eyes flickered back to the boy. He hadn't stirred. He hadn't moved at all. But suddenly, his presence in her home felt much larger, much more dangerous than she could have imagined. She touched his shoulder gently, shaking him just enough to try and bring him back to consciousness. "Hey, kid," she whispered. "Can you hear me? Who are you?" His eyes fluttered open for the briefest of moments. His lips parted, and in a voice so weak it was barely a breath, he managed to say one thing before slipping back into unconsciousness. "Noah." Emma sat back, staring at the small, fragile boy lying on her couch. She had a name now, but it didn't answer any of her questions. If anything, it only made the mystery of who he was and where he had come from even more unsettling. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind rattling against the windows. But inside, Emma could feel something else entirely creeping in. A foreboding sense that whatever had brought Noah into her life that night was only the beginning of something far bigger and far more dangerous. The storm had eased by morning, but the questions swirling in Emma's mind had not. She barely slept, dozing in and out of consciousness on the armchair near the couch, waking up every time Noah stirred. He mumbled in his sleep broken words, whispers of things she couldn't quite make out. When the first pale light of dawn filtered through the curtains, he finally began to wake. Emma sat beside him, watching as his small fingers clutched at the blankets, his face creasing in confusion. His eyes, big, dark, and wary, blinked up at her. He looked scared. "You're safe," Emma said softly. "I found you out in the storm and brought you here. Can you tell me what happened?" Noah hesitated, his tiny hands tightening around the edge of the blanket as if holding on to something tangible could anchor him. I don't know," he whispered. "I was at home. And then my mom said I had to go. She gave me the bag and told me to run. She said they were coming." Emma's stomach clenched. "Who's they?" He shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. "I don't know. Bad people. She said they'd hurt me if they found me." Emma exhaled slowly, trying to keep her own fear from showing. This wasn't just a lost child. This was something bigger, something dangerous. A sharp knock on the front door made her freeze. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as she glanced at Noah, who shrank into the couch, his face going pale. "Stay here," she whispered, rising from her seat. She moved cautiously toward the door, her instincts screaming at her to be careful. Through the small window, she saw them, two men in dark suits standing on her porch. Their expressions were unreadable, their postures stiff with authority. Something about them sent a chill through her, a deep, instinctive warning that they weren't here to help. She cracked the door open just enough to see them. "Good morning," one of them said, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of something cold. "We're looking for a boy, around 7 or 8 years old. Dark hair, thin. Have you seen him?" Emma's hand gripped the edge of the door tighter. Every nerve in her body told her to lie. "No," she said, her voice steady. "I haven't seen anyone." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, and he leaned in just a fraction. "Are you sure? We have reason to believe he might be in this area. It's very important that we find him." Emma forced a casual shrug, gripping the door so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Sorry. Haven't seen a thing." The men exchanged a glance. Something unspoken passed between them before the first man gave her a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "All right," he said, stepping back. "But if you do happen to see anything, I'd suggest you let us know. For your own safety." Emma didn't speak. She just nodded and shut the door, locking it immediately. Her hands were shaking as she turned back to Noah. He was curled into himself, his knees pulled to his chest, looking impossibly small. "Who are they, Noah?" she asked, barely keeping the panic out of her voice. "Why are they after you?" His wide, frightened eyes met hers. "I don't know their names," he whispered. "But they work for someone bad. Someone my mom was afraid of. She said he'd hurt us if they caught me." Emma's mind reeled. "Who is he? Why would he want you?" Noah swallowed hard, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "Because of my dad," he said, his voice cracking. "She said they don't care about her. They want me because of him." Emma's breath caught. His father. The missing piece of the puzzle. The man who was at the center of whatever trouble this boy was running from. "Who is he, Noah?" she asked, her voice gentler now. Noah hesitated, as if the very name carried weight. "Logan Pierce," he finally whispered. Emma's stomach twisted. She knew that name. Anyone who paid attention to the news did. Logan Pierce wasn't just rich, he was one of the wealthiest, most influential men in Chicago. A powerful businessman who had built an empire from the ground up. He was known for being ruthless, untouchable, and, apparently, he was Noah's father. Emma exhaled slowly, running a hand through her hair as the realization sank in. This wasn't some random case of a kid getting lost. Noah was being hunted. Because of who he was. The men would come back. And next time, they wouldn't just knock. She knelt in front of Noah, gripping his shoulders gently. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "You're safe here for now. But we can't stay. They'll come back. And I don't want to be here when they do. Do you understand?" Noah nodded, his little face pale but determined. "Where will we go?" Emma swallowed, her mind racing. "I don't know yet. But I'm going to keep you safe. I promise." The next few hours were a blur of frantic preparation. She packed a bag with what little food she had, extra clothes, and, against her better judgment, the money from Noah's backpack. Whatever mess he had been thrown into, she would need it to get them somewhere safe. Her car wasn't exactly reliable, but it was all they had. "Stay close to me," she told Noah as they slipped out the back door into the icy morning. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the fresh layer of snow blanketing everything in silence. Her heart pounded as she scanned the street, half expecting the men to jump out at any moment. They made it to the car without incident. But as soon as she turned the key, the engine let out a sickly sputter. "Come on," she muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. "Not now." Noah's small voice broke through the tense silence. "What if they find us?" "They won't," she said, more to convince herself than him. "We're going to be okay." After a few nerve-wracking tries, the engine finally roared to life. Emma pulled out onto the road, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. She didn't have a destination in mind, just the overwhelming need to put as much distance as possible between them and the men who wanted Noah. And the terrifying suspicion that no matter how far they ran, it wouldn't be enough. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of cold asphalt cutting through the frozen landscape. Emma kept her hands tight on the wheel, her knuckles white from the pressure, her heart pounding with every passing mile. Snow still clung to the trees, but the storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie, quiet world. Noah sat beside her, small and silent, his fingers gripping his backpack like a lifeline. Every now and then, he would glance over his shoulder, as if expecting to see the dark SUV reappear at any moment. Emma knew the feeling. She had been checking the rearview mirror every few minutes, her paranoia growing with each turn of the road. She wanted to believe they had managed to slip away unnoticed, that the men in suits had decided they weren't worth pursuing. But deep down, she knew better. They wouldn't stop. Not until they had Noah. She glanced at him, at his small, pale face, at the way he curled into himself, as if trying to disappear into the seat. He was so young. Too young to be running for his life. Swallowing down the lump in her throat, Emma forced herself to focus. They needed a plan. Noah, she said gently, keeping her eyes on the road. Do you know where your dad is? He hesitated, his little fingers tightening around the straps of his backpack. I think he lives in Chicago, he said finally. Mom mentioned it once. But she didn't want me to know too much. Chicago. That was nearly 1,000 miles away. Too far to reach in one stretch. Especially in a car as unreliable as hers. But what choice did they have? Emma sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. Okay, she said. Thinking fast. We'll figure it out. Noah nodded. But the fear in his eyes didn't fade. Hours passed. The road stretching endlessly before them. Towns came and went. Gas stations and rest stops blurring into the background. Emma tried to stay calm. To keep driving. To keep moving. But the exhaustion was creeping in. Then she saw it. In the rearview mirror. Just far enough back to make her stomach twist. Was a black SUV. Her breath hitched. She couldn't be sure. Not from this distance. But something in her gut screamed that it was them. For a few moments. She did nothing. Just kept driving. Watching it. Waiting. Then it changed lanes when she did. Matched her speed when she sped up. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter. Noah, she said. Keeping her voice steady. I need you to stay calm. Okay. But I think we're being followed. He turned in his seat. His breath hitching when he saw the car behind them. What do we do? Emma's mind raced. They were still in open highway. Too exposed. If she pulled over, they would trap them. If she kept going, they might try to force them off the road. She swallowed hard. There was only one option. We lose them, she said. Her foot pressed down on the gas. The old car groaning in protest as it sped forward. The SUV followed. Emma gritted her teeth. Scanning the road ahead. There, a side road. Nearly hidden by the snow-covered trees. It was risky. But she had no other choice. She veered off sharply. Tires skidding slightly as she took the turn too fast. The road was narrower. Winding through thick forest. And her heart pounded as she fought to keep control. The SUV followed. Hold on, she warned. Gripping the wheel with everything she had. The trees pressed in on either side. Their dark branches scraping against the windows. The road twisted sharply, barely wide enough for her car. But then, the SUV was gone. Emma didn't dare slow down. She kept driving. Pushing forward. Until the road turned into nothing but thick woods. Only then did she finally pull over. Her breaths coming in sharp gasps. For a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Noah whispered. Are they gone? Emma didn't answer right away. She checked the mirror. Scanned the trees. Listened for any sign of an approaching engine. Finally. She nodded. For now. Noah exhaled. Slumping in his seat. He looked so small. So tired. And Emma felt something deep in her chest ache. We'll stay here for the night, she said softly. They won't find us out here. Noah didn't argue. He was too exhausted. Emma wrapped him in the spare blankets. Keeping the heat running intermittently to conserve gas. He fell into a restless sleep. Curled up in the passenger seat. While she kept watch. Every sound made her jump. Every rustle of the trees set her nerves on edge. But the forest remained still. Quiet. As she stared at Noah's sleeping face. A fierce protectiveness welled up inside her. This kid had been thrown into a nightmare. And now. So had she. But she wasn't going to let them take him. Not while she was still breathing. The battle had been fought. And the danger that had once loomed over Noah was finally gone. The men who had hunted him were no longer a threat. And Logan Pierce, the father he had never known, had stepped in not just as a protector, but as a father who had finally realized what truly mattered. Emma stood by the window of the safe house, watching as Logan knelt beside Noah. speaking to him in a voice softer than she had ever imagined he was capable of. At first, Noah had been hesitant, unsure of whether to trust this man who had been nothing more than a name whispered by his mother. But over time, something shifted. The walls came down, and for the first time since that fateful night in the snowstorm, Noah began to smile again. Emma knew that her part in this story was coming to an end. She had done what she had promised, she had kept Noah safe. And now, he had a future. One far beyond the cold, lonely night she had found him on the side of the road. As she turned to leave, Logan spoke. "You saved my son." Emma met his gaze. "He saved me too." With one last glance at Noah, she stepped outside. Breathing in the crisp morning air, a new day had begun. And with it, a new life for all of them. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more incredible tales of love, resilience, and hope.